In this profession, you build a fortress around your emotions. It is necessary. I have zipped body bags over victims of brutal accidents and elderly people who lived a century. You learn to see the body not as a person, but as an empty vessel. This professional distance is the only thing that keeps your sanity when you are surrounded by thousands of silent endings. But there are moments that break these walls. Moments when the line between life and death becomes terrifying. I need to take you back to the Hopkins basement, to a night that started like any other, but ended in pure impossibility. This account is corroborated by medical staff and security records. It involves a patient named Harold Wittmann, a man clinically and legally dead. However, in the frozen silence of the morgue, he defied the absolute finality of death. This is the investigation of the night a corpse refused to rest, and the horror of witnessing the impossible. To understand the weight of what happened, you need to understand the environment. The Johns Hopkins morgue reflects the age of an institution from 1889. Institutional beige walls over concrete, fluorescent lights that hum constantly, and a refrigeration system that maintains the exact temperature of 3 degrees Celsius. It is a world apart, isolated from the life that pulses in the floors above. Down there, the only absolute rule is that the dead do not move. Or at least that is what I believed. It was the night shift, Valentine's Day. While the world outside celebrated life and love, the hospital entered its silent nightly rhythm. I arrived at 10:45 p.m., changed into my scrubs, and took the service elevator down to sub-level 2. Solitude is a constant at that hour. I worked alone, managing the entry and exit of bodies, surrounded only by the hum of machines and artificial cold. I checked the day's log. We had 6 bodies stored in the cold chambers. Among the occupants that night was the most recent arrival, Harold Wittmann, 73 years old. The medical report was clear and conclusive. He had suffered a massive hemorrhagic stroke that destroyed his brainstem. Despite resuscitation efforts for 30 minutes in the cardiac ICU, he was declared dead at 6:18 p.m. There was no ambiguity in the diagnosis. The neurological damage was catastrophic and irreversible. Harold was not just a patient in a coma, he was a corpse. I reviewed Harold's file in my office with the usual meticulousness. Retired, a widower for 8 years, with no children or close relatives listed. By Maryland law, his body would remain in our custody for 72 hours before being transferred for an indigent burial. It was a lonely end to a long life. Standard procedure required identity verification and visual inspection. I put on my latex gloves and walked to storage unit number 3, where he had been placed. The refrigeration units at Hopkins are old, installed in 1992. Heavy stainless steel doors, each with a small window and a latch that closes with a loud metallic click. I opened compartment 3C. The body bag was there, closed, with the identification tag on the toe visible. I unzipped the bag for the visual check. Harold Wittmann had the waxy and slightly sunken appearance common to the recently deceased. The skin was pale, with lividity beginning to appear. I touched Harold's skin. The temperature was cool but not freezing, consistent with someone dead for less than 6 hours. Rigor mortis was just beginning to set in the small muscle groups. His jaw was stiff, his fingers starting to curl. Everything indicated a standard death. I made the notes in the system, zipped the bag shut, and pushed the tray back into the darkness of compartment 3C. The metal latch clicked, sealing Harold in his temporary steel tomb. I went back to my office, separated from the main area by a wide glass, believing the night would follow its monotonous routine. But at 11:47 p.m., the silence of the basement was violated. I heard a sound coming from the storage area. It wasn't the thermal popping of the building or the fridge motor. It was a metallic thump, dry, deliberate. as if something heavy had struck the door of one of the refrigerators from the inside. I stopped and listened, feeling a primal chill. I know the sounds of the morgue, compressors turning on, fans spinning, the old building settling into its foundations. In 17 years, I learned to filter out the industrial background noise. But that sound was different. It had physical force behind it, a mechanical intention. I got up from my desk and walked to the main area. The fluorescent lights bathed everything in clinical clarity. The refrigeration units lined the wall, doors locked. The silence now felt heavy. I was about to return to the office, convinced it was just the building, when it happened again. A thump. Louder this time, and now I could pinpoint the source with chilling precision. Compartment 3C, Harold Wittmann's compartment. I walked slowly toward the unit. Logic screamed in my mind. Bodies do not move in refrigeration. The cold stops biological processes. Rigor mortis is gradual. It never creates sharp impacts against the metal. Fear is not a common emotion for me in this job. The dead do not scare me. They demand respect and care, not fear. But that sound violated the rules of my world. I reached the unit and looked through the small window of the steel door. The body bag was there on the tray exactly as I had left it. No perceptible movement. I stood there for a full minute, watching, waiting, trying to convince my brain that the building's acoustics had deceived me. I tried to rationalize the impossible. Perhaps some sound from the floor above had traveled through the pipes, creating an auditory illusion coming specifically from Unit 3C. Perhaps the fridge motor had failed. I went back to the office, but unease settled in like a virus. I pulled up Harold Wittmann's file again. I reread every line, searching for an error. Age, 73, cause of death, hemorrhagic stroke in the brainstem. Death confirmed. He was dead. He had to be. Modern medicine is based on facts, not assumptions. A man suffered a catastrophic event. His brain was destroyed. His heart stopped. This happens every day in hospitals across the country. Death is binary. Either you are alive or you are not. Harold was on the other side of that line. But at 12:13 a.m., logic completely unraveled. It happened again. This time it wasn't an isolated sound. There were multiple impacts. Thump, thump, thump. 3 deliberate blows. If anyone else had been in the morgue, they would have heard it clearly. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, feeling my heart race in a way I didn't want to admit. I walked back to Unit 3, fighting a primal instinct, an ancient fear that the dead do not remain where they should. That corridor felt longer now. The hum of the light seemed louder. I was about to confront something that my rational mind refused to accept. I stopped in front of compartment 3C, flashlight in hand, and focused the beam of light through the window. The bag was there, motionless. But as I watched, I saw something that made my blood run cold in my veins. The bag moved. It wasn't an optical illusion created by shadows. It was a subtle shift in the center, as if something inside was pushing the heavy fabric upward. I froze. The mind tries to find explanations, gases, gravity, anything but the truth. Then it happened again. A visible bulge in the center of the bag, pressure applied from the inside out, which then relaxed. My hands were shaking, betraying years of professional composure. I reached for the latch. The door opened with a hiss of escaping cold air. The internal temperature was 3 degrees, perfect for slowing decomposition, too cold for any normal biological process to occur. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the thick plastic of the body bag. I felt Harold Wittmann's chest through the plastic. It was still cold. It was still rigid with developing rigor mortis. But as my hand rested there, I felt the impossible happen. The chest rose under my palm, a small expansion of the rib cage. Then it fell, and it rose again. The corpse was breathing. I pulled my hand back as if I had touched fire or acid. That violated everything I knew about physiology, medicine, and death itself. Harold had been declared dead for nearly 6 hours. His brain stem, the command center for breathing, was destroyed. He had no cardiac activity for 30 minutes before arriving here. Dead, refrigerated bodies do not breathe. But I had felt it. It wasn't decomposition gases escaping, it was a rhythm. It was breathing. I unzipped the bag, exposing the upper torso. His face remained with the waxy paleness of death, but his chest was rising and falling. Harold was breathing, slow and irregular, maybe 4 or 5 times per minute. I needed to verify the source of this impossible life. I pressed my fingers against the carotid artery, searching desperately for any sign of a pulse. Nothing. I pressed my ear against his chest, listening through the thin hospital gown. Absolute silence, no heartbeat. The engine of life was off. The heart was stopped, but the chest continued its macabre dance of rising and falling. I had to call someone. This was beyond my competence and understanding. If the hospital had made a mistake, if Harold was alive, he needed urgent help. But before I could reach for my radio, the unimaginable happened. Harold's eyes opened. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't like waking from a sleep. They simply opened all at once, like a switch being flipped. Blue eyes, clear, staring fixedly at the metal ceiling of the cold compartment. I stumbled backward, dropping the radio onto the concrete with a crash that echoed through the silent morgue. My voice failed when I tried to speak. "Mr. Wittmann." No response. His eyes did not move, did not blink, did not focus on me. They remained fixed, glassy, staring at nothing. His face showed no consciousness or pain. It was the expressionless mask of death, motionless and waxy, but with eyes wide open and a chest moving in a sickening rhythm. I forced myself to move closer again. I waved my hand in front of his face. No reaction, no tracking movement. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed the beam of light directly into his left eye. The pupillary reflex is one of the last functions to disappear. The pupil should contract with light. It remained motionless, fully dilated, with no neurological response. Clinically, those eyes were dead, but they were open, moist, and defying medical reality. I recovered the radio from the floor, my hands sweating cold inside the latex gloves. I called security with an urgency I could barely control. "This is Sullivan in the morgue. I need an immediate medical response. I have a situation with a deceased patient that I cannot explain." The officer's voice crackled back, skeptical. When I said I had a breathing corpse, there was a long pause on the radio before they confirmed sending the on-call doctor with top priority. The minutes of waiting dragged on like hours. I stood by the open compartment, watching Harold Wittmann breathe the freezing air of the refrigerator. The rhythm never changed. 4 breaths per minute. The eyes never closed. The face never changed expression. The air conditioning blew around us, creating a surreal scene. I was locked in the basement with a biological impossibility that refused to accept its end, an error in the matrix of existence. Dr. Marcus Lynn arrived 7 minutes later. A third-year resident, young, fast, and skeptical. He came off the elevator with his lab coat unbuttoned and a stethoscope around his neck. "What's going on, Robert?" he asked. I took him straight to Unit 3. I reported the facts. Death at 6:18 p.m., refrigeration, and now spontaneous respiratory activity without a pulse. His expression changed from annoyance to pure shock when he saw Harold's chest moving on its own. "Jesus Christ," whispered Dr. Lynn, taking a step back. He put on gloves and started the examination immediately. Fingers on the carotid, stethoscope on the chest, light in the eyes. No pulse, no heart sounds. Pupils fixed and dilated. He listed the signs of death while watching the breathing continue. He touched Harold's skin. Cold, consistent with refrigeration, but there is definite thoracic movement. This shouldn't be happening. It's physiologically impossible. The doctor examined the extremities with clinical care. Rigor mortis present in facial muscles and hands, lividity starting in dependent areas. He looked at me, eyes wide above his mask. By all clinical signs, this man has been dead for hours, but he's breathing. He tried pain stimuli, rubbing the sternum hard. No reaction. Harold Wittmann was a breathing corpse, indifferent to pain, light, or the presence of the living. Dr. Lin pulled out his phone immediately. "I need the attending physician down here now." His voice trembled slightly. There was no explanation in the medical books for that. Respiratory agonies occur minutes after death, not hours later, and certainly not after refrigeration. We were facing a phenomenon that violated basic physiology. Harold Wittmann was not alive, but he wasn't fully dead either. He was stuck somewhere in the middle, in a terrifying limbo. Dr. Sarah Hendris, an attending physician with 25 years of experience, arrived 12 minutes later. She entered already putting on gloves, with the expression of someone who had seen everything in medicine. But when she leaned over Harold's body, silence took over the room. She repeated every test, every reflex check. "This is medically impossible," she said quietly. "You cannot have respiratory effort without cardiac function. The diaphragm requires oxygen." The three of us stood around that cold body, witnessing an event that defied reality. "The heart isn't beating, but he's breathing," said Dr. Lin. Dr. Hendris called neurology as an emergency. She knew she needed more eyes to validate what was happening. While we waited, Harold remained there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, pupils dilated, and his chest rising and falling as if moved by an invisible mechanical force. Dr. Peter Warren, a senior neurologist, arrived 18 minutes later. He was one of the most respected professionals at Johns Hopkins. He performed every possible brainstem test. He tested the gag reflex, the corneal reflex, and the response to intense painful stimuli. "There is no brain function," Warren concluded. "He is legally and medically deceased. More than that, he has been refrigerated. This man is dead by all known standards." Dr. Hendris questioned the breathing. Warren stared fixedly at Harold's chest. "The respiratory drive comes from the medulla oblongata. His brainstem was destroyed by the stroke. There should be no neural signal." He seemed disturbed by his own conclusion. They decided to move Harold from the cold chamber to a steel table in the center of the morgue. They needed a clearer observation and better lighting to document what seemed to be an unprecedented medical discovery. I helped transfer the body. It was heavy, rigid from the cold and the onset of rigor mortis. The skin had that grayish tint typical of the dead. However, as soon as we placed him on the metal table under the powerful lights, the breathing continued. We were in a morgue at 2 in the morning with 3 of the best doctors in the world, all paralyzed before a man who was dead but refused to stop simulating the movements of life. I watched everything from my office window, keeping a timed log of every event. At 1:42 a.m., Harold Wittmann made a sound. It wasn't a human groan, but a long, soft exhalation, as if air was being forced out of his lungs by an unbearable internal pressure. The sound echoed off the concrete walls of the basement. The doctors froze. We all heard it. It was the first sound coming from a man who had had no voice for hours. The tension in the morgue was almost physical. Then I saw Harold's right hand twitch. It was just a spasm in the fingers at first, but it soon turned into something more. "Doctor." Warren approached, whispering about involuntary muscle spasms. But what we saw next was not a spasm. It was a coordinated contraction. Harold's fingers closed into a loose fist. That required motor control. It required signals that his brain was no longer capable of sending. "This isn't involuntary," said Dr. Hendris, her voice heavy with a dread that no doctor likes to admit. Harold's left hand mimicked the movement. Then his arms began to slowly bend at the elbows. The movement was irregular, jerky, as if the muscles were fighting against the stiffness of rigor mortis itself. The corpse's torso began to vibrate slightly with the effort. Something was happening inside that lifeless body. With agonizing slowness, Harold Wittmann's torso began to rise from the steel table. His shoulders lifted off the metal. His abdominal muscles contracted visibly under the hospital gown. He was trying to sit up. "No," I muttered to myself, "this cannot be happening." The human logic desperately tried to deny what the eyes were seeing. A corpse, cold and pulseless, was rising of its own accord. Harold's torso reached a 30-degree angle. His arms shook violently, hands resting on the steel table as if seeking balance. His head fell to the side as the neck muscles lacked the strength to support it, but the body kept rising. The doctors instinctively recoiled. Science had left the room. What remained was a primal horror. A dead man was sitting before us, defying nature itself. Harold Wittmann reached a full vertical position. He was sitting on the steel table, as rigid as a wax statue. His head hung slightly, but his eyes remained open, dilated, and fixed on the void. The silence in the morgue was absolute, broken only by our own accelerated breathing. He stayed like that for seconds that felt like hours. A corpse sitting in the heart of Johns Hopkins, a monument to the impossible that none of us could explain. Then Harold released the sound that will haunt me until the grave. A long exhalation, a low hiss that passed through his inert teeth and lips. It wasn't a cry for help or a word. It was the sound of dead lungs being emptied for the last time by muscles that shouldn't have had strength. Immediately after, all tension left his body. Harold collapsed forward, his head falling against his chest and his arms drooping lifelessly beside his motionless torso. Everything stopped simultaneously. The breathing ceased. The movement stopped. Dr. Warren was the first to approach, checking again for any sign of life. Nothing. Harold Wittmann was dead in a way he hadn't been minutes before. This time, the end was absolute. The corpse was laid back down on the table. His eyes, which had previously defied the darkness, were closed by human hands. The morgue returned to being just a cold room full of machines and silence. The rest of the early morning was filled with whispers and frantic logging. Dr. Hendris pulled me aside, her voice a firm command. "Robert, keep this confidential. We need to investigate before panic spreads." I asked what I should write in my official report. She instructed me to report only the facts: unusual post-mortem motor activity and observation by medical staff. No speculations, no theories, just the raw and naked chronology. I tried to document the undocumentable. "How do you describe in clinical language that you saw a dead man sit up?" I wrote about the sounds, the respiratory movement, and the muscular coordination. I noted the names of the doctors present and the exact times. I submitted the report at 6:30 a.m. and went home, but sleep did not come. The image of Harold rising from that steel table was burned into my retinas. I searched for a rational explanation, but medicine had failed that night. The autopsy performed 2 days later did not bring the answers we sought. The pathologist confirmed the original diagnosis. Harold's brain had been destroyed by the hemorrhagic stroke. There were no toxins, no rare diseases, no signs of residual electricity. The final report contained a vague note about atypical cadaveric spasm. But I knew the truth. Spasms do not last for hours and do not produce rhythmic breathing. What happened to Harold has no name in science. Weeks later, I spoke with Dr. Hendris. She had secretly consulted specialists from all over the world. "We don't know, Robert," she admitted. "The theory is that some residual neural activity in the spinal cord survived, but that doesn't explain the coordination needed for him to sit up." She confessed that it terrified her. If death is not the immediate and binary end we believe it to be, what happens to us in those hours of silence and cold inside a drawer? 3 years have passed since that night of February 14th. I continue to work at Johns Hopkins, but I have lost the professional distance that protected me. Now every time I close a body bag, I hesitate. Every time I hear a metallic noise in the cold chamber, my heart races. I no longer believe that death is the absolute cessation we pretend it is. I saw eyes that should have been closed open. I saw a soulless body make a final and macabre effort. I think of Harold Wittmann every night. Was he conscious during those hours of refrigerated darkness? Was his mind trapped in a body that refused to turn off the lights completely? The true horror is not the movement of a dead man, but the possibility that consciousness persists beyond the last heartbeat. That we are there, feeling the cold, hearing the hum of the lights, waiting for an end that takes longer than expected. Harold Wittmann legally died at 6:18 p.m., but he only truly rested after 2 in the morning in my morgue. This event changed my relationship with mortality forever. Science can give technical names to hide its fear, but I was there. I saw the corpse that sat up, and as long as I live, I will remember that the limit between this world and the next is much thinner and more terrifying than any of us dare to admit out loud.